Thank you for your presentations. I have a question for you, Katie, related to your investments, GSK's investments in the community, both in Denver and also the upcoming one. It's in North Carolina or Philadelphia? The $3 million.
Oh, thanks. We did an 18-month partnership in Denver. We have one underway in St. Louis. We're 1 year in on a 3-year in Philly, and we're about to launch an 18-month partnership in North Carolina.
That's great. So these investments that you make, is there sustainability built into them? My sense of philanthropy investments for these type of initiatives is that it's a one-time deal, and then there's a hope that these programs can become as self-sustaining, and I'm curious what your perspective is on that type of investments that you're making.
For those who didn't hear, the question had to do with sustainability, and it's something that I really appreciate because it's complicated, isn't it? And we built into this grant program when we launched it an emphasis on sustainability. So the nonprofits, when they applied for the grant, they had to demonstrate upfront how this work would continue when the GSK funding sunsetted. And so that we built it in from the start, and I also really work with the groups to help them. Like, I put myself out there to be willing to help approach other funders and businesses to get involved in the work. I would say I'd like to see us have better success going forward of being able to engage other funders in the work, but the programs are all sustainable.
To partnering with GSK and GE. You guys are really competent. Those are incredibly well-run companies. I'm not persuaded that every hospital is run in such an effective fashion. The public hospital chain in New York City would have closed if it were a commercial business decades ago. It's tens of millions of dollars in debt. So I like the idea of you guys as a partner, but this issue of sustainability is a problem, that you're not built into the community in the same way as hospitals or other sort of local groups might be. Have you done, is there a hybrid model that's possible? Do you partner also with local nonprofit institutions like hospitals that are going to stay to see if there's some way to derive the best benefits of each sort of partner in revising things for either?
Great question. I'll just start by saying that we selected the communities we're currently in because of our history in those communities. And the sort of aha moment for leadership that there's as much investment as part of the community conversation and the fabric of the community as a hospital or a community-based organization. But I think you're right. I think there's always a risk of companies moving, changing locations, and not necessarily having the stability that a place like a hospital might. And I think the reason that we have started to see success, and again, we are so new in these efforts and we're so new with the conversation, but I think the reason we've started to see success is because of the partnerships that we're building with other foundational entities in the community, whether they be a YMCA or a hospital or I think, as David said, even another utility or a company like GSK. In Cincinnati, for example, we partnered with a grocery store chain, and we partnered with a bank, and we partnered with an insurance company, and that insurance company insures somewhere north of 50% of all of the people in the city because of the size and the fact that they are the home city for that insurance company. And it's not to say that that company won't close up someday and leave, but the real conversation was around who is committed and who is starting to think of themselves as part of that fabric, like nonprofits have done for so long. And it's really changing the dialogue and the conversation to think of ourselves instead of just a for-profit institution that has a global footprint, but instead being a smaller player at a very personal table, because all health and healthcare really is local. And so understanding the needs of that particular community instead of just developing a a solution that is going to be rolled out on a global scale is not where we want to be at this time in this project.
And I would just add to that, one thing that I really appreciate about the collective impact approach, and for those who aren't familiar, there was a very good article in the Stanford Social Innovation Review called Collective Impact, and I believe it was written by Mark Kramer and John Kanya and maybe Michael Porter as well. But it was from like 2011, but that really was an influential article in our thinking and our approach. And one aspect to this approach, and I need to say also, it's not new, it's just a name to capture what people have been doing for quite some time, right? And one of the aspects in the collective impact approach is having a backbone organization. And for GSK, it's really important to us when we work in different communities, that backbone is an entity that's been there, that will be there, that's been a real anchor in that community. And so in Philadelphia, our partnership is anchored or backboned by the Food Trust, a very respected, strong nonprofit. And so even like no matter what GSK does, and we have a huge footprint in Philly, and well, we're in all 50 states and Puerto Rico, so we have an incentive in all. But Philly, we have a very big presence, and we're really proud to partner with a backbone in each of these cities, though. To do the work. And the funding, actually, part of each grant goes towards developing the capacity of every nonprofit in that collective. So we actually build in the thing. This is the funny thing about funders. Every funder says they want results, right? But they won't fund the reports and the evaluation to show the results. Every funder says they want collaboration, but they often won't fund the time and work it takes to collaborate, right? So the nice thing about collective impact is it makes the funder think ahead of time of how do you build capacity? How do you ensure strong evaluation and continuous improvement and communication? It's thinking through all those things on the front end, and so elements of sustainability and capacity building are also considered when GSK does it.
Great. Both of your presentations were fantastic, and it's great to hear all of this work happening through the private sector. Kind of a two-part question. One is private sector can be very different from academia, it can be very different from nonprofits, and there's also a cultural gap that can happen. So I'd love to hear some of the things that were effective at getting through that. And then the second is sometimes there can be a little bit of questioning or maybe mistrust between entities, and so I see you both shaking your heads. I'd love to hear, if that has come up and what you've done to overcome it.
I think I'm going to start first with the mistrust. I think that, especially from a public health perspective, there's often a great deal of mistrust of multinational global corporations. And I've spent 20 years in public health, and so many of my friends were shocked when I took this job and said I was going to the dark side. I hope to make the dark side a little lighter. But I think the way to overcome the mistrust is to be there, is to be open to the questions and the challenges, and to figure out solutions that are collaborative instead of top-down. Like Katie said, it's not just about writing a check. It's about writing the right check for the right types of projects and then staying involved. And, to your question, it's about reminding people that we've been in a community for 145 years in the case of Cincinnati. And we have no intent of moving away from Cincinnati. So it happens, and I think part of the reason I was brought in was not me personally, but the reason this position was created was to put someone on the ground in those conversations, instead of just saying, we have a presence because we're there and we have a representative from our engineering team at the table, but it's really to have this national person at the table to be able to answer those questions and go back. And as far as the language between academia or community-based organizations, I think it's something that we're still struggling with. And it's more that it's a struggle, I think, on our side, my side. And I say that because there are hundreds of great ideas of programs and projects that we either want to build on because they're success, or that we want to help initiate because people have come and said, we think this is really going to be valuable in our community. And so to be able to translate the value of that to somebody who's thinking about the bottom line for their company is, in my experience so far, been one of my biggest challenges. And so actually being able to utilize and leverage the academicians, the research, the data, the experience of a community-based organization that's been in the community forever, people who are there and living and working every single day to try and make it better. That's the argument that I'm using to take to my leadership to say, we should fund this. We should support this, whether it's with money, with time, with people, even if it doesn't make sense today. The unintended benefits and the unintended positive consequences really have a long-term impact, and it builds the trust. It builds the belief that we're not going anywhere, that even if it doesn't look like putting money into a dance program from a GE perspective makes sense, it makes sense because those young women are the engineers of tomorrow. Those young men are the coders of tomorrow, and they are living in that community. And if we can't harness their talent and their abilities today to make them realize how valuable they are for us tomorrow, then we're going to be lost, and we're not going to be able to continue to survive in any community or be a profitable business or organization.
Drop the mic.
Thank you for your thoughtful presentations. One of the challenges I think that emerges in these kinds of endeavors is that there is this sort of balance that has to be struck, perhaps, between proprietary for-profit endeavors and the, I guess, Michelle, what you might call more of a public health orientation, which is sort of even potentially free dissemination widely of the models that you develop. So if these companies actually invest their time and effort in developing these models for interacting with communities and building capacity and so forth, can you talk a little bit about how you deal with that tension? Is that something that's a part of the discussion now? Is that something that you are thinking might become a part of the discussion? And actually, do you understand where I'm coming? Yeah, okay.
I think that's a great question. Fortunately, up until this point, we have done exactly what Katie was really focusing on, which is taking initiatives that were struggling or that were starting to see success but had no sustainability, and really trying to promote those and support those in various ways. I think that we haven't created anything yet that's in competition with ourselves, so we haven't run into that. But because we sit in the ventures world, there are a lot of my colleagues that actually live and work in Silicon Valley that are investing resources into new technologies and new businesses as we speak. And it's a whole new business lens for GE. And one of the things that we want to do, because it makes good sense, is to make people aware of those, not to sell them, but to make people recognize that there are tools available. Maybe they're a hospital, maybe they're a private provider, maybe they're a nonprofit organization, maybe they're an educational system that may be valuable in their efforts to try and improve overall health outcomes. So it will happen that we will want to share these tools, but not want to look like we're either only involved with them because we're trying to sell something, or because we want to try and do some profit, kind of making. So I think that we're right now navigating those new waters. But I also think that the way I'm trying to look at it is at this amazing opportunity of offering new enhancements and technologies almost free of charge to people who would not be able to purchase them because other people are investing in them, and it gives the that startup feel of really trying to prove value before you have to put a lot of money in to pay for something that works. And so we are navigating that. As far as programmatically, we've basically been given a blank slate to develop and implement programs and support other organizations' programs without having to ask permission. And so we're lucky in that way. And I think that's some of our good fortune in where we sit in the organization.
If I hear you right, I think your question is kind of getting to the idea of moving from philanthropy to business revenue generating approaches that have a shared value, right, for business and society. And the idea of transforming a business so that it can be profitable and good for society is, I think, something that pretty much every executive I know is really striving towards. This concept of shared value, which for those of you who don't know, there was an excellent article in the Harvard Business Review last January on the topic. And the concept is very challenging to deliver, but we are seeing examples of it. And what I had shared before about what GSK is doing throughout Africa and least developed countries, the tiered pricing approach, which allows for countries to afford our products and then reinvesting profits to build their healthcare infrastructure and then training healthcare workers, that creates this virtuous business cycle. So it's good for business, good for health. If we can figure out something like that for improving health equity in the United States, that would truly be the sustainable effort that we need to go towards. What GSK is doing right now in communities really is more on the philanthropic side. So it is completely supported by our business success, is why we can do that work. And we're proud to do that work, and we think we're focusing our philanthropy in the right way, that it's very needed to address disparities and improve overall health outcomes, but it's still sitting in that bucket of philanthropy, right? And so I think that as societies, we go forward, we all need to think about, are there revenue generating approaches? And the gentleman who spoke before myself and Michelle was talking about some of the micro investments and community development investments that do have a risk adjusted rate of return, and some interesting approaches that they're seeing. You know, if we can work together to generate more of that, I think that's where a big promise is in addressing health inequities.
I wanted to address your comment that, or your recommendation that funders support organizations with a proven track record and organizations that can show they will continue with or without your support. In other words, support organizations that don't need support. In contrast, like the City Project, we started in 2000 because the work needed to be done and nobody else was willing to do it. And fortunately, we started with a major grant from the Ford Foundation. And the Ford Foundation took a leap of faith. And based on our prior track record in the civil rights context and identifying a problem that nobody else was addressing, they gave us the funding to start up. And we are disruptive innovators, but we get that kind of response all the time from foundations that say, you're not a national organization, therefore we will not fund you. Or how do we know that you'll be around when this grant runs out? Well, you don't. And this is a broader issue, and Dr. Bullard, who spoke earlier, and I have written, there's now a Green 2.0 initiative for mainstream environmental organizations to diversify their boards and staffs and programs. As Dr. Bullard and I have pointed out, diversifying mainstream organizations is not good enough. What we need is sustained long-term capacity building support for NGOs led by people of color who have direct ties to the community, for whom environmental justice and civil rights compliance is a core part of their culture and of their values. It's not add-ons. It's not something that they're doing now because it's a flavor of the week. Ultimately, Green 2.0 is a money-making venture for mainstream organizations. It is not a support mechanism for organizations of the kind that Marion talked about and that Dr. Bullard has supported. And indeed, if you look at the environmental justice movement, there is no national environmental justice movement like there is an NRDC or the Nature Conservancy that has more money than God. And that was a conscious decision by the environmental justice movement that by its nature, environmental justice is local and it's community-based. And as Dr. Bullard said, why let something like funding stop us? Something like funding is stopping a lot of us. So as long as private organizations and foundations fund only what has worked before and will show will work in the future, you're missing the point. And again, it's reinforced when you say you have no evidence for the fact that supporting youth-based initiatives works, but nevertheless you do it. That's the right spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I hear your point, and it's certainly well taken that there are investors out there to invest in new disruptive models. For GSK, our approach to addressing health disparities was very much informed by a listening tour. So we really designed this program based on what we heard and what we read, and the communities that we went to in Denver, St. Louis, and Philadelphia made it very clear, especially in Denver, that what they're doing is working and there's evidence, and there was not an appetite for GSK to create and launch some new partnership, a new program, when there's already a lot underway that is demonstrating results. And if we really do want to improve health outcomes, we should build on what's working and foster collaboration. So for GSK, again, I hear your point, but for us, with our focus and our goals, we wanted to really respond to what we heard in our listening tour. And we heard loud and clear that there is some really strong evidence of different interventions working, and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation County Health Rankings and Roadmap resource is loaded with evidence of programs that work. And what we tried to do was create a funding mechanism that allowed us to learn how these groups are working. And in the process, we did evolve because we had it sort of open, that this youth leadership approach emerged as something we really found compelling. So we bolted that in, but it wasn't, we did not have an appetite to fund a new venture when we could see so many strategies with results.
Thank you for your presentations. I'm curious, in a few presentations the point was made that to address health equity, one should look at the history of health disparities and social inequity, social injustice in a community. Have you found that to be part of your dialogue? And if so, was there a way in which you could make that a comfortable conversation, or was it really not a major part of your collaboration?
When we started, it wasn't. It is now. And just last week, I was in Houston, and almost an entire 2-hour meeting, community-based meeting that we had, was focused on the discussion of race, not in an effort to try to differentiate in the community, but to figure out what the best way forward was. I was taken with the maps that showed the dots of the population and how it's not necessarily, it is place-based, but all of a sudden you can see these very obvious demarcation of where different people live. And so the conversation was really more about implementation and what's the best way forward and what's the best new approach to trying what the community wants to try. And in this case, it was around food insecurity. And the conversation actually was, it's not just a certain segment of the population that is food insecure. If you look at a new initiative being put in place by one of the hospitals in Houston, they're actually doing a survey around food insecurity, and it runs the gamut of color, of socioeconomic status, of location of where you live. And so trying to figure out the way forward to address something that in some ways came across in this conversation as much broader than people expected. And so that's where I think it can be it's new for us, certainly, and it's exciting, but I think that's where it becomes not a contentious issue, but using the data, a realistic issue. We want to do something, we want to do it in the right place for the right people at the right time so that people are healthier, but it's not what we expected to see. So what do we do? And we don't have an answer yet, but we're working on figuring that out. And I think that will just, I think once we see some success and get some traction, we have some leverage to get more traction. So hopefully in 3 years when you invite me back, I'll have a lot more to say.
Yeah, Katie and Michelle, very exciting work. Both of your companies are very important technology companies. And in so much of what you're talking about, information technology, the maps, dots, all of that, is an extremely important part of the discussion. Can you just speculate on how or what information technology is going to bring to the question of improving health equity? I mean, I'm 71. I can't possibly, could possibly speculate in this, but you're so much younger and so much better tuned in.
Well, I don't know the answer, certainly. Okay. I wish I had a crystal ball. I think purely from the perspective of not a health outcomes conversation, but purely from the perspective of companies changing over time, I think it is amazing to see how the private sector is moving towards technology. I mean, all of us are doing it. We're connected all the time. I think that this is incredibly valuable in a way for the health equity conversation in a way that we both didn't expect and don't know what it will bring. And what I mean by that is that all of a sudden we can start to have conversations about challenges that impact health, about racial disparities around health and equity that wouldn't have been able to been had before because it would have felt like a contentious debate around something that's uncomfortable like race. Now, the data, the health information exchanges that we're participating in, the data that we're collecting on plane engines and on train cars and in medical imaging is going to tell us, without knowing necessarily the race of people, what is impacting them. And I think that helps our argument here in this room to say that what we do has to be impactful for all people to actually achieve equity. It's not about targeting a particular community or a particular problem, but it's really about figuring out how to achieve equity. And to me, I think technology is going to be the springboard from which to do that. I don't think we've figured out how to harness it yet, and I'm excited to try.
Of equity is obviously the operative word there, but when you think of what's available in technology today, whether it's a train or a plane or human genome, what's happening in the weather, what's knowing stuff about your community, what you order online, people are developing profiles of you every day, and that's just going to grow exponentially. And as you think about the cloud-based opportunities with data and data analytics that then create machine learning that develop predictive models, there'll be some opportunity to intervene in ways we haven't imagined yet. And there's very few companies that actually have the ability to do that. Watson from IBM is collecting like a library, but it's not actually using the data to create the analytics, and I know these companies the same, and so I think there's a great opportunity. Don't forget, it's global. It's not just the U.S. And equity isn't just a problem in this country; it's a problem around the world. And so I think the opportunities with large data systems and our ability to actually capture that in cloud-based ways will create opportunities we can't imagine with data. When you take CDC data, when you take genomic data, when you take commercial data, when you take claims data, and you actually start to aggregate those into ways, just remarkable things will happen. But it's going to take a while.
Yeah, the issue, the sort of question arises because the enormous exponential expansion of data information technology, say over the last 30 years, has also been accompanied by exactly what we are concerned about, which is a rise in inequity, okay? And so, and even to the point now where a presidential campaign is profoundly shaped by a sense of inequity. I'm very encouraged by what both of you are talking about. And the question is kind of at how is it that it's being done by some companies, but evidently not by a society broadly enough yet that a sense of satisfaction.
Yeah, I think it's more than we might realize. You know, whether it's Google or others, there's a lot of people starting to figure out how to use information. I think that, back the operative word, equity, we have not done a good job, even when we have simple information, right? We heard that all day today. And so I do think there's the altruism and the business of data versus actually using data to change a society and raise it up and move the whole curve to the right. So I think that therein lies the challenge. I have no doubt business will use data to make money, and they should. But I have a lot of doubts that businesses will use money to change the issues of equity in this country.
Well, let me throw out one other thing that might encourage you. So it has to do with the pharmaceutical industry in general, but specifically GSK. As I mentioned before, we've advanced the world's first malaria vaccine. It's been 30 years. And the technologies that we have learned, our scientists have learned along the way, are actually, even though we're giving this vaccine to the world at a not-for-profit cost, so we'll be able to, the small profit we make will go back into developing and discovering other diseases, neglected diseases. But that technology is being applied to advance other diseases, like our shingles vaccine and all. So that actually helped us earn the number 6 slot on the Fortune Companies Changing the World list, as recognition of that technology advancing other disease states, even though it came from a philanthropic approach. The other thing with the industry is clinical trial data. When people have a disease and they volunteer to be a part of a clinical trial, they're hoping it will advance science. The challenge with intellectual property has proven very tricky in this industry. And so that trial data, a lot of companies in the past have been hesitant to share. There is now a movement led by a group called All Trials, and GSK is the first company to sign up for this. We have opened up our 2 million compound library. Companies, especially those wanting to research diseases of the developing world, have access to this library. This is how we're going to advance public health, is sharing information, collaborating. We have an open lab in Spain, so researchers from nonprofits can come in and do scientific research and studies using the best equipment provided in our labs. So there's real excitement. J&J is also leading in clinical trial data, so there is movement there. So I would say be encouraged with the technology for health equity.
Bill, last question. Sorry, ladies, we'd like to stay here all day.
The very last question. Actually, commenting as much on Jim's comments as your comments, and that is that the way we're structured as an economy, as a society, is that corporations, like any institution, has a self-interest. And we should expect them to participate and contribute to the resolution of healthcare inequity as an indirect result. The more direct result we should expect from them is they will respond to the opportunity to reduce their costs of healthcare, to improve their productivity as a corporation. Also, their source of new employees, and as you were talking about, shared value, the opportunity for incremental income. And so corporations can and should be involved because they see a real self-interest in doing so. And I think it behooves society to convince them that there is a real opportunity here for them to improve their self-interest by directly getting involved in improved healthcare delivery.
I think that the thing that we have to keep in mind is that when we help others, we help the whole, right? And so malaria is a great example because for a long time nobody would develop the vaccination because there was no money to be made, right? It wasn't something. So now you've kind of figured out, well, if we do that, that'll help us develop something where we can make money, which is good, right? And then it put back the 20% you said towards developing something else. So maybe it's a new model, Bill, that allows all boats to rise, which would be the key. So I think that's really great. Thank you both very much. We really appreciate it.